It all started on a typical busy evening in a high-end restaurant, the kind where the chandeliers gleam so brightly that they almost hurt your eyes and the polished floors reflect every movement like a mirror. The kind of place where patrons don't just come to eat. They come to be seen, to display wealth, power, and a sense of superiority that extends far beyond the menu. Among these patrons was a billionaire, a man whose reputation for arrogance preceded him. He was known in business circles for his sharp tongue, his ruthless strategies, and, unfortunately, a habit of looking down on anyone he deemed beneath him. That night, he chose a target that he assumed would be easy, an African-American waitress who was navigating the crowded floor with trays full of plates, her uniform crisp and professional, her demeanor polite and composed, her smile practiced but genuine. As he sat in his large, leather-upholstered chair, he beckoned her over with a wave of his hand, the kind of gesture that communicates ownership rather than request. The waitress approached cautiously, balancing a tray that already carried several orders. He began with a comment on her appearance, under the guise of small talk, but it was clearly a taunt. He laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that carries the weight of condescension, and said something that he thought would embarrass her or make her stumble. His words were calculated to provoke a reaction, designed to assert dominance in a space where he believed he could do so without consequences. His expectation was clear. She would either smile nervously, apologize unnecessarily, or mutter something timidly before scurrying back to her duties. But the environment itself added layers to the tension. Around them, other patrons noticed the interaction. Some glanced curiously, intrigued by the drama unfolding before their meals. Others pretended not to see, unwilling to involve themselves, perhaps thinking it was not their place to intervene. The lighting highlighted the billionaire's confident posture, the slight smirk on his face, and the expensive watch glinting on his wrist as he rested it casually on the table. Meanwhile, the waitress remained composed, maintaining eye contact and listening, her hands steady as she adjusted the tray slightly. She had seen arrogance before, yes, but there was something different about this moment. The sheer certainty with which this man believed his wealth and status gave him the right to belittle her, to make her feel small in front of an audience. He continued, escalating subtly, testing boundaries, throwing in comments that reflected not just disrespect, but a broader societal assumption that someone of her position and appearance could not possibly respond with intelligence or wit. He expected her to falter, perhaps to laugh nervously, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to retreat. It was a performance he believed he could control, a power play played out in slow motion. In his mind, he had rehearsed the scenario countless times, imagining the easy dominance he would assert, the quiet humiliation she would endure, and the invisible applause he would receive from others who shared his mindset. Meanwhile, she processed each word carefully, not as a reaction of fear, but with a sharp awareness of the social dynamics at play. She recognized the assumptions, the bias, the attempt to assert superiority through mockery. But she also recognized something else, that this was her moment to navigate the situation on her own terms. Every step she had taken to reach this point in life, her education, her experiences, her ability to handle pressure, had prepared her to respond, not react. She had learned that confidence and calmness in the face of ridicule can disarm even the most arrogant individuals. The tension in the room was palpable. Waitstaff nearby, noticing the interaction, held their breath, some hoping she would manage to maintain her composure, others worrying about how she might be affected. The billionaire, still smug, leaned back slightly, certain that the outcome was already decided, that the narrative was his to control. He underestimated not only her intelligence, but also her courage, the quiet strength she carried in her posture and in her gaze. Every second felt stretched, each one heavy with expectation. The atmosphere was a blend of anticipation and unease, a microcosm of societal dynamics condensed into a single interaction. Here, wealth and status confronted dignity and professionalism. Arrogance met calm confidence, and a simple request from a customer became a stage for testing human reactions. His mockery, intended as a trivial insult, was actually a mirror of his own insecurities and assumptions, revealing more about him than he realized, while she observed, collected, and prepared for the moment when she would assert herself, not aggressively, not loudly, but with precision and intelligence. Despite the billionaire's mocking tone and the smirk he wore like armor, the waitress maintained a calm and steady presence. From the outside, it might have seemed effortless, but the truth was that her calmness was the product of years of navigating difficult situations, of learning to hold her ground in the face of disrespect, and of understanding that losing composure rarely led to anything positive. She had been trained, both by experience and by necessity, to respond with clarity and self-possession rather than letting emotions dictate her behavior. Every gesture she made, every adjustment of the tray in her hands, was measured, controlled, and deliberate. There was no flinch, no sign of frustration, no nervous laughter to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Her ability to remain calm under pressure had been honed in countless interactions prior to this one. She had encountered rude customers, impatient diners, and people who believed their wealth entitled them to disregard common courtesy. Over time, she developed an internal system, a mental checklist that allowed her to assess situations quickly, understand the intent behind the words, gauge the potential outcomes of a response, and choose the action that preserved her dignity while asserting her presence. This system had become almost automatic. The moment the billionaire began to mock her, her mind analyzed the situation almost instantaneously, recognizing that he sought a reaction, that the audience was watching, and that any emotional outburst might be used against her. Her calmness was not passive. It was active, intentional, and strategic. She positioned herself slightly upright, her shoulders relaxed but firm, conveying confidence without aggression. Her eyes met his with steady focus, neither bowing in submission nor flashing in challenge. The subtlety of her body language communicated a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with his overt display of superiority. She understood the psychology at play. By remaining composed, she denied him the power he was trying to claim, leaving him without the validation he sought from her reaction. Around her, the restaurant's atmosphere responded to her composure. Other staff members noticed her poise, perhaps drawing inspiration or relief from the fact that she did not crumble. Patrons who had been observing the interaction shifted slightly in their seats, sensing the tension and realizing that the dynamic they expected to play out, a wealthy man dominating a young server, was not unfolding as they had imagined. Her calmness was a form of silent communication, a message that she was aware of the hierarchy he was attempting to impose, and that she had chosen not to accept it. Her mental focus was crucial. While he spoke, she listened attentively, parsing each word, tone, and intention. She allowed herself a few seconds to absorb the insult, to recognize the underlying condescension, but she resisted the urge to respond immediately out of anger or self-defense. Her training in emotional intelligence enabled her to hold space for the moment, to consider the potential impact of any response she might give. The goal was not simply to reply, but to do so in a manner that was precise, confident, and impactful. She understood that composure amplified the effect of her words. By contrast, any sign of panic, embarrassment, or anger could have undermined her credibility and allowed him to maintain dominance. Her calmness was also informed by a sense of personal pride and self-respect. She did not see herself as someone to be belittled or diminished because of her position or appearance. Her identity, her skills, and her intelligence were not defined by the opinions of a single man, no matter how wealthy or powerful he might be. By maintaining composure, she was asserting that her value did not hinge on his approval or acknowledgement. This internal grounding gave her a form of armor, one that could not be punctured by insults or mockery. As the seconds passed, her ability to stay composed became almost tangible to the onlookers. People began to notice the contrast, his impatience and expectation of submission versus her serene control. The room's energy shifted subtly, the balance of attention moving from the man attempting to dominate to the woman who refused to be shaken. Every breath she took, every measured blink, reinforced a narrative of quiet strength. Her calmness was a statement, demonstrating that power does not always belong to the loudest voice or the richest individual, but sometimes to those who control themselves under scrutiny. Even as the billionaire continued, perhaps sensing that his usual tactics were failing, she remained unflustered. Her hands held the tray with stability, her posture communicated readiness, and her eyes reflected neither fear nor anger. In this way, she turned what could have been a humiliating encounter into an arena where composure itself became a form of resistance, a tool for reclaiming authority in a situation designed to strip her of it. Her calmness was not passive endurance. It was an active, deliberate, and strategic choice, a demonstration of control that would set the stage for the moment when she finally spoke. After holding her composure through the billionaire's mocking remarks, the waitress finally spoke. When her words came, they were precise, fluent, and delivered with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. There was no stammering, no hesitation, no trace of doubt. She responded in complete sentences, articulating her thoughts in a way that was calm, yet undeniably firm. Her voice, steady and measured, carried a weight that contradicted the expectation of meekness that the billionaire had assumed she would display. Every syllable she spoke was carefully chosen, reflecting not only her intelligence, but also a deep understanding of the social dynamics at play. This was not a reactionary utterance. It was a strategic and deliberate assertion of her dignity. The content of her response was as important as the delivery. She addressed his comments directly, but without descending into aggression or personal attacks. Instead, she used wit, logic, and insight to undermine his assumptions. Her words highlighted the arrogance embedded in his mockery, revealing the power imbalance he believed he could exploit while simultaneously demonstrating that she refused to accept it. By speaking fluently and confidently, she transformed the encounter from one that could have been humiliating into a demonstration of self-respect and intellectual sharpness. The contrast between his haughty demeanor and her composed, articulate response was striking, creating a tension in the room that drew the attention of every observer. Her fluency played a critical role in this moment. It communicated more than knowledge. It communicated control. When someone speaks clearly, confidently, and without hesitation, it signals mastery over the situation and command over oneself. Her words were structured, her sentences flowed naturally, and her tone projected calm authority. This fluency was not merely about vocabulary or grammar. It was about timing, intonation, and the ability to maintain composure while delivering a verbal message that landed with impact. Each pause she used emphasized key points. Each inflection carried subtle emphasis, and each gesture complemented her speech, reinforcing her message without distraction. The environment amplified the effect of her words. The other patrons, initially curious or perhaps entertained by the billionaire's arrogance, now found themselves witnessing something unexpected. Their attention shifted from the spectacle of mockery to the remarkable presence of the waitress, whose articulate response defied expectations. Some leaned forward slightly, captivated by the sharpness of her remarks. Others exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the surprise and admiration she commanded simply by speaking confidently. The power dynamic in the room began to shift, not because the billionaire had physically lost control, but because her words had subtly yet decisively reframed the situation, turning the narrative on its head. Importantly, her response was not just about defending herself, it was about reclaiming agency. By speaking fluently, she demonstrated that she had the right to occupy space, to assert her intelligence, and to challenge the assumptions imposed upon her. She reminded everyone present, whether intentionally or not, that status, wealth, or outward displays of superiority do not automatically confer moral or social authority. Her verbal fluency functioned as a tool of empowerment, both for herself in that moment and symbolically for anyone witnessing the interaction who had ever been underestimated or dismissed. The confidence embedded in her speech was contagious, inspiring an unspoken acknowledgement of her strength among the audience. Her delivery also contained elements of precision and timing that heightened the impact. She spoke at a measured pace, allowing each sentence to register fully before moving on to the next. This pacing ensured that her points were not lost in haste, and it forced the billionaire, and anyone observing, to confront the substance of her argument. By avoiding rushed or reactive speech, she maintained authority over the conversation, subtly asserting that she was not being bullied or rushed into submission. The fluent structure of her reply acted as a barrier against his intended humiliation, converting the moment into a demonstration of her ability to navigate conflict with intelligence and grace. Beyond words, her fluency was paired with an aura of confidence that radiated from her posture, gaze, and gestures. She stood tall, shoulders back, with hands relaxed but purposeful. Eye contact was steady, conveying certainty without confrontation. Her body language reinforced the authority of her words, creating a holistic impression of control. This combination of verbal fluency and physical poise made it nearly impossible for the billionaire's mockery to land as intended, leaving him momentarily unprepared for the strength and clarity she displayed. Every sentence she spoke chipped away at the presumed superiority he had relied upon. What had begun as a one-sided attempt at ridicule became a scene in which her articulate response dictated the flow and tone of the encounter. The fluency of her words not only countered his mockery, but also redefined the audience's perception, turning an intended display of power into a showcase of resilience, intellect, and dignity. The impact was immediate, visceral, and undeniable. The moment her words landed, the room seemed to shift. There was a collective pause, subtle but unmistakable, as everyone present registered what had just happened. The onlookers, who had been watching the interaction with varying degrees of curiosity, amusement, or indifference, now found themselves fully engaged. Their initial assumptions, that the billionaire would dominate the exchange and that the waitress would falter, were completely upended. People leaned slightly forward in their seats, eyes widening in surprise, some instinctively covering their mouths, others exchanging quick, incredulous glances with those around them. There was an almost palpable energy in the air, a tension that hovered as if everyone was trying to process the unexpected turn of events. For many of the patrons, the shock came not only from the content of her words, but from the sheer confidence with which she delivered them. There was no hesitation, no nervous laugh, no self-deprecating tone. Her composure under pressure and her ability to articulate her response fluently created a contrast so stark that it demanded attention. The billionaire, who had expected to elicit a display of submission, now seemed caught off guard. His smug expression faltered slightly as he realized that his words had not landed as intended. The balance of power, at least perceptually, had begun to shift, and the audience immediately sensed the change. Reactions varied across the room. Some diners felt a sense of admiration and respect for the waitress, their initial surprise giving way to appreciation for her poise and intelligence. They nodded subtly, murmured softly to one another, or sat back with a small smile, acknowledging the courage it took to speak so confidently in such a high-pressure situation. Others, perhaps less accustomed to witnessing someone challenge authority so directly, seemed stunned, their expressions frozen as they tried to reconcile what they had just seen with their expectations. There were whispers, subtle exclamations, and soft gasps as the shock rippled through the crowd, evidence that the encounter had become more than a simple exchange. It had become a moment of public recognition, a lesson in presence and dignity. Even the restaurant staff, who were usually trained to remain in the background, could not hide their astonishment. They watched closely, some exchanging brief glances with each other, recognizing the significance of her response. For them, it was a validation of resilience and professionalism, a reminder that the human spirit often shines brightest under pressure. The waitress's ability to maintain her composure and speak confidently became a quiet inspiration, reinforcing the notion that courage and self-assuredness can have a visible, immediate impact, even in unexpected settings. The billionaire's reaction further amplified the audience's perception of shock. His smirk, which had carried the weight of arrogance moments earlier, began to waver. He opened his mouth, perhaps to retort, but paused, as if unsure how to respond. The words he had used to belittle her now seemed hollow, and the energy he had relied on to command the situation had dissipated. There was a subtle tension in his posture, a stiffness that contrasted sharply with the relaxed yet firm presence of the waitress. Observers immediately noticed the reversal. The intended victim of mockery had become the center of authority, and the wealthy, powerful figure who had sought to dominate now appeared unsteady, exposed, and momentarily powerless. The audience's shock was also magnified by the social context of the encounter. In a space where wealth, status, and appearances often dictate perceived authority, seeing a young black waitress confront a billionaire with such confidence disrupted conventional expectations. Many onlookers, consciously or unconsciously, had internalized assumptions about hierarchy and deference, and her ability to subvert those assumptions in real time created a profound cognitive dissonance. The shock was not just about the immediate exchange. It was about witnessing someone challenge systemic perceptions of power with intellect and composure. As the moments stretched, the reactions continued to evolve. Some patrons quietly applauded internally, impressed by her courage and eloquence. Others shared brief, incredulous looks with strangers at nearby tables, silently communicating their astonishment. The energy of the room shifted, subtly but unmistakably, from one dominated by the billionaire's expected authority to one that acknowledged the power inherent in self-confidence, intelligence, and eloquence. The waitress's words had not only countered mockery, they had created a ripple effect, influencing how everyone in the space perceived the dynamics between privilege and personal dignity. Even beyond the immediate circle of patrons, the shock was amplified by the clarity and precision of her response. Her words were so deliberate, her fluency so striking, that they demanded repeated attention. People mentally replayed the exchange, each time noticing more nuance, more courage, more control. The scene became a silent demonstration, showing how calmness, composure, and articulate speech can transform a moment of intimidation into a display of personal power that resonates with all who witness it. The story of the waitress and the billionaire didn't end when the initial confrontation concluded. In fact, that was only the beginning. Almost immediately, the interaction began to spread beyond the walls of the restaurant. In today's world, moments like these travel quickly. Someone at a nearby table had discreetly recorded part of the exchange on their phone, capturing the precision of her words, the confidence in her voice, and the stunned reactions of those around her. Within hours, the video began to circulate on social media platforms, shared first by friends and acquaintances, then by strangers who were captivated by the unexpected turn of events. The story went viral, not because of scandal or controversy alone, but because it carried a message that resonated deeply with many people. Dignity, intelligence, and courage can triumph over arrogance and entitlement. As the clip spread, reactions poured in from around the country and eventually internationally. People were impressed, inspired, and in many cases, moved. Viewers praised the waitress for her calmness under pressure, her articulate response, and her refusal to be intimidated. Her fluency and confidence became symbols of empowerment, showing that even in environments where power and wealth are used to dominate, personal strength and composure can shift perceptions and assert authority in subtle but undeniable ways. Social media users dissected her words, shared screenshots of her response, and created posts celebrating her courage. Hashtags referencing the encounter began to trend, highlighting the collective admiration and the shared understanding that this moment was more than a personal victory. It was a moment that symbolized resistance to mockery, bias, and assumptions of inferiority. News outlets quickly picked up the story, providing broader visibility. Journalists recounted the events with varying levels of detail, but all emphasized the dramatic contrast between the billionaire's arrogance and the waitress's poise. Many articles focused not only on the viral video, but also on the social and cultural significance of the exchange. Analysts and commentators highlighted the broader implications, how moments of unexpected courage can challenge entrenched stereotypes, disrupt assumptions about class and race, and spark conversations about respect, dignity, and human decency. Through this media amplification, the story reached audiences who might never have witnessed such an encounter in person, multiplying its impact exponentially. The virality of the story also sparked personal reactions from individuals who identified with the waitress. People who had experienced mockery, discrimination, or underestimation in their own lives saw themselves reflected in her response. They recognized the bravery it takes to remain composed and articulate when confronted with arrogance and disrespect. Many shared their own stories, expressing solidarity and gratitude for having witnessed someone stand up confidently in the face of condescension. In this way, her words and demeanor transcended the immediate incident, creating a sense of collective empowerment among viewers who felt validated and inspired by her example. Interestingly, the viral spread of the story forced the billionaire into the public eye in an unanticipated way. He had not anticipated being challenged so publicly, nor had he imagined that the encounter would be recorded and shared widely. What had been intended as a private display of superiority became a public moment in which his attempt to belittle someone was countered with grace, intelligence, and clarity. This shift in narrative turned him into a secondary character in a story that had already captured the imagination of the public, demonstrating how quickly perceptions of power can change when confronted with unexpected courage and articulate resistance. The story's influence extended beyond social media and news outlets. It became a reference point in discussions about workplace dynamics, privilege, and the subtle forms of disrespect that many people endure daily. Educational forums, corporate training programs, and social commentary pieces began using the incident as an example of how composure, verbal fluency, and confidence can serve as powerful tools in situations of confrontation or intimidation. By going viral, the story created a ripple effect, reaching audiences far beyond the restaurant and initiating conversations that might not have occurred otherwise. In addition, the story inspired creative reinterpretations and tributes. Artists, writers, and content creators began producing illustrations, short videos, and written reflections capturing the moment. Memes circulated, not as mockery, but as celebrations of her courage and wit. The narrative became a cultural touchstone, symbolizing the broader human desire to see fairness, intelligence, and dignity prevail over arrogance and condescension. It reinforced a lesson that resonated universally, that the power of words, delivered with confidence and composure, can leave an indelible impression, even on those who seem untouchable. Through all of this, the waitress's actions became emblematic of the power of presence and eloquence. Her calm, fluent, and confident response had transcended the personal sphere, reaching a vast audience and inspiring countless individuals to reflect on their own capacity for courage and self-respect. The viral nature of the story ensured that it would be remembered, shared, and discussed, highlighting the ways in which a single moment of dignity can have far-reaching effects in a connected, observant world.